Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I am so thrilled that we are welcoming back Hannah and Laura from On Wednesdays We Read for another episode of our Nostalgia Book Club joint thing.
Our mini series, if you will.
Yes.
Thank you for having us on. We enjoy being back, and we enjoyed this book. So,
how dare you for picking a book that played with my emotions like this?
I'm so excited. I thought I was going to get ripped apart for all of the weird gender stuff, but I guess we can talk about that in a little bit.
We give this book a pass for being written in 1979. I read it and I was like,
yeah, very much like Roald Dahl vibes.
Yes.
I was getting
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, soon we'll be discussing Witch by Eva Ibbotson. But first, what's something great that happened recently for everybody?
I went to go see Hadestown with our aunt, and we got brunch beforehand, and it was really nice.
I adored Hadestown when I saw it.
I love that
Did you love
soundtrack.
it?
It was really good. I had not heard the soundtrack before, so I was kind of going in blind. And I thought it was going to be more about Hades and Persephone than Orpheus and Eurydice, but it was great. Yeah, it was fantastic.
And the version I went to, like my touring company, the Hades had the best voice I'd ever heard, like better than the soundtrack because it was so low. I did not know how he was getting that deep. But then Orpheus is more like a tenor role, and my Orpheus had some struggles.
Oh, no. I thought that my Orpheus had some struggles too, to be honest. But the Hades was very deep, yes.
So maybe we had the same touring company, but
it's possible.
Yeah, it is possible. But that was fun. Well, my good thing, I am engaged and there's lots of struggles with it, but we signed a venue this weekend, which was my goal of the week. My fiance is a hemmer and har, and so he kept being like, well, we could go back to the drawing board. And I was like, no, we are finding one this week and we are signing the contract. I do not care. And so we actually did it. So he was like, we made your goal. And I was like, yes, we did. Thank you. So I like when I can stick to a goal.
That's very exciting.
So my good thing is definitely weirder than everyone else's. Earlier this year, my husband and I got a lot more chickens, and we did not have a home for them. So we finally finished our new chicken house and got it all painted and everything, and it looks really good. So I'm excited about that.
Oh, yay.
I don't think that's weird.
No.
Okay, good.
Laura, did you recreate the chicken house from the Hannah Montana movie?
No.
If you guys want a good laugh, look up the Hannah Montana chicken house. She adores it at the end of the movie, and it is bad. So,
does your chicken house look like anything special, or is it just a regular chicken house?
It's a house for chickens.
We actually got this old shed that had rotted sides and everything, and so we put new sides on, and we got some older steel for the roof, and we repainted all of it. And actually, my parents have been doing a house remodeling project and everything, and they've got all new siding on their house, and they got a new back door. So actually their old back door is the door on this chicken house. They have kind of a fancy door with a little window that's all diamonds and everything inside. So it looks kind of fancy for chickens, but yeah, my husband's uncle was like, oh yeah, that's like the Hilton hen house. I've never seen anything that nice for chickens. So, but it turned out really nice. We painted it red, and then the roof is green. So I kind of like
it.
Laura, I also have a question. How does your rooster feel about it? Because I know that
we currently do not have a rooster.
Oh, okay. I remember you having a rooster last time I visited you. So
no,
my bad.
No.
No,
not long after we had Emily Edwards on, actually.
Oh, okay. My bad.
It was actually a very mean rooster.
It was a mean
disappointed
rooster,
that it's gone.
All right. Sorry, guys. Not to make this rooster talk.
My good thing is actually the silliest, so I'll take that crown away from you, Laura. Yeah. Daniel and I started our second run through of Baldur's Gate 3. Ooh. We finished the first one and started our next one the same, there was no break. We did not stand up from the computer. So we were like, all right, next game, let's go.
Just shake off and then sit back down again. Right ahead.
We don't need water. We don't need food. Just keep going.
Yeah.
Are you doing anything differently in the second run through?
Yes. So in our first run through, I don't know how familiar y'all / our listeners are, but in Baldur's Gate 3, it starts with your characters being infected by mind flayers, and you have the option throughout the game to use powers from the infection or to not. And in our first run through, we didn't use them at all. We were like, no mind flayer corruption. And in this one, we're doing all mind flare. Any opportunity to use mind flare powers, we're like, yes, do it.
It's fun.
I'm very excited. It's probably what I'm going to do after this.
I've seen so many people talking about that game,
Mhm.
and as people may know, Hannah and I do not play video games, so we're like kind of outside of that realm, don't really have a clue, but I've seen so many people talking about that game, and it looks really cool actually from some of the screenshots that people have shared.
It's incredible. We've been following the production team. That's not what the word is. The studio for like their last 2 games. Like we kickstarted their game before this. When we found out they're the ones who got the rights to make Baldur's Gate 3, we like threw a party. We were so excited.
Oh,
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah, great studio plus like fun story. They did such a good job.
oh, good.
I could talk about this for a very long time, but I won't. What's everyone drinking today?
I'm drinking a Bloody Mary, mostly because I have Bloody Mary mix that I'm trying to use up, but also the name of the drink felt appropriate with this book.
Fair.
I drink only non-alcoholic things now, but because of that, I have made a couple new friends. And one time I went out and I liked the non-alcoholic Guinness, and so they bought me a bunch of dark beers, like because people find out you like one thing and they're like, "Oh, I know she likes that." I rarely drink dark beer, but they got me this brand called Busty Lush, and it's an oatmeal dark. And I think it's very ironic that it's called Busty Lush because there is like 0.5% alcohol in here, so there is nothing lush about this oatmeal dark. So, but it's pretty good. I like it as a dark beer.
Nice.
I am drinking green tea, and it is from Walmart, so it's not special.
Green tea is always special.
I really like it. So
That's good.
I have what basically amounts to a cup of cinnamon, but I have cinnamon tea with Fireball. So it's the cinnamon is through the charts, off the charts, through the roof.
Super cinnamony.
I discovered last winter, that I don't like cinnamon in my tea. It doesn't work for me.
oh my gosh, I
Interesting.
love
Like-
it.
Like adding cinnamon to other tea? Because this
No,
is a
like-
cinnamon tea. Okay.
Like cinnamon in tea, as in cinnamon tea. Cinnamon
Gotcha.
as an ingredient in the tea.
Interesting.
Interesting.
I actually think I'm kind of on the same page with you, Sarah. Like it
Yeah.
tastes a little weird to me, but I also don't like too much fruity, like apple fruit teas. Like
Mhm.
Same, actually.
Yeah.
So
So
I
I
think
think-
we're exactly on the same
Like,
page.
so I think that probably has something to do with it. Like if you don't like apple cinnamon, I think that like there's not enough natural cinnamon usually. Usually it's like playing on the apple, and if you don't like that, you're not gonna
Yeah.
like the cinnamon.
How do you feel about ginger teas, though?
I like ginger tea.
It's
Okay.
okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it matters, but this is an herbal tea. I think I would agree that like black tea with cinnamon flavor would be weird.
It doesn't,
Okay.
cinnamon in tea just doesn't work. Like I love cinnamon in like mulled wine, mulled cider.
Mhm.
I like cinnamon. It's just that in tea, it's not for me, apparently.
Interesting. Well, you don't have to have any.
This is Lilly cinnamon tea.
Yes. I won't pour it on my keyboard to try to get it to you.
I think that's probably for the best.
Well, has anyone read anything good lately?
I have, and I have been waiting to talk about it with you guys because you are the manga people. So I read the first 3 volumes of Rooster Fighter. I don't know if you have read this, but I want you to read it ASAP. It's the most ridiculous manga that makes me laugh so much because it follows a rooster who is trying to get revenge for the death of his sister, and he kills demons with sonic rooster crows. And
Amazing.
he has animal husbandry realistic sex with chickens throughout the whole series. I told Hannah it's like the worst manga, but it's also the best because it's just so ridiculous and doesn't take itself seriously. So I need you to read it. I've been begging people to read this.
That sounds amazing.
Laura has begged people to read this, and their answer back is no.
How can people say no to a pitch like that? I don't understand.
I told someone on Instagram that it's like looking at a car crash. You just can't look away. And they said, if you stand too close to a car crash, you get involved in the crash.
I need to read that manga, but I've not read any manga. So I almost want to do that as my first one because I feel like
Yes.
it's the worst representation, but also the perfect thing to be like, oh yeah, I've totally read that. I read this
It's
one. Like,
actually on a lot of lists of people saying it's like their most beloved manga. And that surprises me because I had just read Spy Family and Witch Hat Atelier, and those were so much better. But if this resonates with people, I get.
Sometimes you just like trash.
Yeah. That's like everyone who watches TV shows where you're really like, oh, that one? And it's like, you can't look away. My old roommate and I had a discussion where she was like, do you remember how much SVU you watched during your dark period? And I was like, yes, I did. And like, I would never go back and watch that with like enjoyment ever. Like, you're just watching something. But for me, I recently read This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal Motar. I really liked that book. It's like right in my sweet spot of like science fiction fantasy. That's like the weirdest thing you're ever going to pick up because it's written by two dual authors who they're each characters who are like in a time war and they're trying to fight against each other, but they're like writing each other notes in like very weird and unique ways. And they're slowly falling in love. And I adored that book. It was weird and strange and lovely. So
I've heard a lot of good things about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have a friend who's a huge fan.
I know that Laura read it and she didn't love it, but she also said like it was probably a little bit of when she read it and how she was reading it.
I honestly think that like sometimes certain books just like don't work with your brain chemistry, and that one just doesn't work with mine. Like literally I read the book and then I was like, I don't know what I just read. So I listened to the audiobook and I still didn't know what I read. So I think it just doesn't work for my brain. And I think that just happens sometimes.
I think I'm a very specific like sci-fi person where it's like the weirder the better. And if I have to buy into something that I don't fully understand, I'm like, this is art. And like I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing.
I finally finished Cabal by Clive Barker. The ending was not, it's definitely a horror book, but the plot was much sweeter and the resolution was like much more uplifting than I was expecting. It was nice.
This one took you a while to get through, didn't it?
It did. Well, I did that thing where I read 70% of it and then had to read podcast books for 3 weeks.
Okay.
Been there.
Yeah. So if you look at like the actual time I spent reading it, not that bad. But yes, I spread it out quite a bit. Weird book. Very good. I have a lot of like opinions, but if I start talking about it, that's what this episode's going to turn into.
Have you read a lot of Clive Barker?
I've been on a kick. This is the third book of his that I've read. I read The Hellbound Heart, which is the Hellraiser book. And then The Scarlet Gospels, which is also about Pinhead from Hellraiser, but written much, much later and not related to the content of the movies. And then Cabal. Definitely like gory, but all have very different vibes. It's interesting. He's a cool guy.
I have no idea who that author is, so I'm going to have to go.
That's all right. You might be aware of the Hellraiser movies.
Okay. Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
So he wrote the books and also, I don't know if he wrote or directed the movies, but was part of the creation. So the first Hellraiser movie is very close to the Hellbound Heart. Very, very close because he did both of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And he did direct the first one because I have it up on Wikipedia.
Ah, thank you.
You're welcome.
But yeah, it's neat. He like was born in the 50s, very involved in the like gay community in England. So has like a very fascinating sort of counterculture approach to horror. And like there are some very dated female characters, but it's not the female characters that are dated. It's just people treating them like they would have back in the day, which is hard to pull off, I think.
Yeah.
For an author to say like, no, she's a real person. It's the people around her who suck.
That's awesome though.
Yeah.
That's like the kind of the vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I'm really enjoying them. But
there have been so many Hellraiser movies.
Yeah. I've seen like 5. They aren't all good.
That's what I've heard.
But apparently the recent remake is very good. Or TV show, something came out recently that I've heard good things about.
I think it's a Hulu movie, it looks like.
But this is not the Clive Barker episode.
I told you if I got started, I wouldn't stop.
I ask questions. It's my fault.
No, this is completely Lily's fault. You're blameless, Hannah.
This is, however, our first spooky month episode of the year. Ooh.
Yay.
Spooky Halloween.
I'm so scared.
I'm throwing a softball here because we read Witch, which is a children's book, but kind of impressively dark for a children's book.
I mean, one scene was very very disturbing.
Well, two scenes. Like I was like the scene with the sisters. I was like, this is
Oh,
dark.
I'm forgetting that. I was thinking the rats.
It definitely goes to some dark places. That's
Mhm.
for sure.
The tone of the book is very lighthearted and silly, but then it'll talk about like, oh yes, eyeballs and like thigh bones in a cute crisscross pattern to decorate the room.
Okay, but I don't think that thigh bones in a cute crisscross pattern is inherently dark.
It's
It's
much
Well,
Whose
one of
thigh
those-
bones are they? I guess.
Well, I think it's one of those weird things where like this is a children's book that has like a very light premise, which is like a wizard or warlock. I forget what it is, but he needs to get
Wizard.
married. A wizard
Mhm.
needs to get married. So he has a competition to prove like which witch is the darkest. And that is inherently not that dark. It seems like comical, which this book is comical, but there are certain things where it's like, well, if you're an imaginative child and you're sitting there like there's thigh bones at a crisscross, you're like, well, someone was murdered for that. That's awesome.
They
And
don't
like
have to have been murdered, though. They could have just
That's
died
true.
of old age.
Grave robbing.
but it's a very strange, like some of the ramifications of this book where you're reading it and you're like, that's surprisingly dark. Like,
really quick. We're going to spoil the hell out of this book because it was written in 1979 and it's for children.
You've had all this time to read it, so
Yeah. But the idea that so one of the witches for her like entry into the competition seals people away in trees, and then the dad is just like, no, I'm going to stay in here. I hate my family. Which is
Well,
wild.
his wife and daughter are like emotionally abusive to him. They're terrible.
Yeah, kind of all of the women in this book are terrible.
Yeah.
yeah. Except for Belladonna, who is the nicest and the most pretty and the best of the land. So she's
Mhm.
fine.
But she doesn't try to be pretty, because if you try to be pretty, then you're evil.
She's not like the other witches, okay?
Oh, this book is the ultimate, like, this girl is not like the other girls who are not like the other girls.
Yeah.
I mean, they do have some names that make them stand out. I mean, that was one of the things that caught me right away from listening to the audiobook was like Mother Bloodworth, Ethel Feedbag was one, if I'm remembering right. So
Yep.
the names are a little out there as well.
They're also a little on the nose because you have like Nancy Shouter, Nora Shouter, Belladonna, like beautiful woman. Like,
Yeah.
It's very British. I think it's a very British kind of humor.
Absolutely.
I do remember the first time I read this book when I was a kid, asking my mom what a kipper is, because I didn't know. And you encounter these things in books for the first time, and you're like, what the hell is that?
How old were you when you read this for the first time?
Pretty young. I want to say
Okay.
like maybe 11 or 12.
Okay.
seems the right age.
Yeah,
I was worried you were about to say like 7.
Oh,
Like-
God.
I was worried about that too. I was like, did she read this too young? Because there are some darker things, so it's like you're kind of treading a line here.
Yeah, I was old enough to love it.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that I read it when I was a kid too, although I don't still own a copy of it. So it probably wasn't a book that I like had very strong feelings about. I do, however, own another book of hers, of Eva Ibbotson's,
And what book do you own of hers?
The Secret of Platform 13.
Okay.
I am aware of this just because I had Googled the author and seen some controversy related to that book specifically. So
I don't remember anything about the book. What's the controversy?
So apparently people wonder if the author of Harry Potter stole a lot of platform 9 3/4 from that book.
Mm,
So
Well, not Eva Ibbotson drama.
Nah,
then.
yeah,
No,
okay,
it-
so it's
Just
it-
more from that other author that we don't like
Yeah,
to talk about.
yeah.
She who must
Yes.
not be named, as it were.
yeah, okay.
Yes.
So it's not controversy that Eva
not
Ibbotson
controversy
was involved
related to this author.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do know that, like, growing up, I remember one of the covers of this book, and off mic, we all talked about how many covers of this book there are and how none of them quite match up to the energy of this, besides the original cover, which is really badass. But, like, I remember the one cover with the witch with black hair, like standing in the middle of the book, and like she has like a weird hairdo and it's very cartoonish. So I remember seeing this book as a child and being like,
Okay.
yeah, that looks like my vibe, and just never picking it up because I skipped a couple grades when reading because one of my sisters only got me like older books, so she didn't have to take me to the library as much. So
Well, you're welcome.
yeah, this was an excellent book. I found a lot of humor in this book, and like Sarah's right, the humor is very British, which makes it very enjoyable as an adult reading this novel because it's a little bit more sarcastic and rude than like I think sometimes American funny books are.
I will also say, like, reading this as an adult, I'm listening to some of the things that were said, and it kind of hit me in the heartstrings a little bit at times because there are mentions of Terrence and how he was a lonely child who turned to animals and became friends with them. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. And so some of the themes that are brought up in this, like loneliness and found family and stuff, like, are really heart-wrenching.
I agree. I was bracing myself to get torn apart for how like patriarchal it is. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that everyone else enjoyed it.
It's not without its problems,
Right.
but I think it's still an enjoyable book as long as you recognize that, yes, there is some really weird like gender stuff and there's some weird patriarchy stuff. And
It's like how the Disney movies now have warnings in certain parts of them where it's like, hey, when you watch this movie, just beware to tell your children there's a scene that's racist. Like,
Yeah.
it's a coming. I think that that's kind of the era I read this with, where there were like certain parts where I was like, oh, like this is deeply like pretty people are all nice and ugly people are horrible, and you should fear anyone who's old because they're disgusting. It's a weird energy because this book first like kind of holds up on a pedestal like dark and gross things, but the second that dark and gross things are put on women, it's reviled and like not good, where it's like he could never marry a woman with whiskers, but he would love to see like eyeballs strung on the wall. Like
Yeah.
the energies do not match each other.
also, a woman who wears Wellingtons is the worst
Oh.
thing ever.
He would really hate me. Oh my gosh.
Well, it's ironic, right? That he says, I want to marry the most evil witch. And then of course all the evil witches are evil and therefore gross in this world. It's like, no,
I mean,
he wanted a nice witch because he wants a
Yeah.
nice wife.
yeah, that's just every man who's like, I really want a smart woman, but I also want to explain things to her. Like, I want to
Mhm.
prove that I'm smarter than a woman.
I have to say, I did not remember Araman at all from reading it as a kid. So clearly he did not make a very strong impression on me.
Apparently he did not make a strong impression on me because off air right before we started this, I was like, oh, the prince. And you all were like, what prince? I had assumed that he was a prince. So my bad.
Prince of Darkness, maybe.
I mean, they do kind of talk about him in terms of royalty. Like, they don't describe him as royalty. He's never
Mhm.
called a prince, but he's this revered icon of darkness in the land that everyone looks up to. So I can see where you got that from.
They do say his wife will be the queen of Darkness Manor or whatever his house is
Yeah.
called.
But then they immediately move out of it.
Maybe I just connected some dots that weren't there.
Yeah. I do think like the book doesn't really care about Aramin though. If you look at it like
No.
past the first chapter, I couldn't tell you 3 things this man likes other than his ghost friend. Like he doesn't really care about much. And it feels like Belladonna is the ultimate choice, like that all of his people around him want him to pick. And they all kind of treat him like he's too stupid to know what's good for him. And they have to take care of him. So I feel like even the author was like, I don't care about Aramin. He is set dressing for the rest of this story. So Child Lily was just good at picking up on what the author cared about.
Oh, his servants being so condescending to him is absolutely delightful.
I disagree just a little bit, not entirely. I think you have a point, but I also think that part of the humor of this book is just how over the top everything is, including how over the top his servants are about him and how he doesn't care about much except not getting married to any of these horrible people who are in the competition.
He retreats and spends all of his time with the ghost of someone who's murdered his 7 wives, really like priming the pump for a healthy marriage.
I was gonna say, you'd think that there would be maybe like some red flags that would be going off for some of these people that they're like, maybe I shouldn't enter this contest, but okay.
Yeah, but he's attractive and powerful and rich. Of course, everyone wants to marry that.
I mean, that's the only thing that matters.
Clearly.
Rereading this, I think one of the reasons why I might have latched onto it so much was all of the familiars
Yes.
who were absolutely delightful.
I love the familiars.
Yeah, each witch has her own like animal familiar. My favorite is, of course, Doris the octopus.
It's not Rover?
Oh, I also love Rover.
I was gonna say Rover was making me tear up.
Rover doesn't count as a familiar, though.
Oh, come on.
He
Yes, it
counts as a
does.
familiar.
No, I think you could rules lawyer it. If you're talking about your favorite familiar, it's totally fine to say Doris and not mention Rover.
Well, the last one on my list is the little bat that lives in Belladonna's hair. So
Oh
I
my
think
God.
I just
Yes.
mean the animal friends.
Yeah, the animal friends are good. I love the chicken story. Like the two sisters who fight all the time in the audiobook. I did like the person who read for it. She has like such an animated voice.
Yeah.
And she'd be like, "No, that's my chicken. No, that's my." It's so delightful to hear these women screaming about chickens.
Because they can't tell the chickens apart.
But like there's also sad moments where like Belladonna knows which chicken was which, and she's like, "I'm just not gonna say anything because it
Yeah.
won't help." Like,
That's gonna create more problems.
yeah.
So
Oh.
let them duke it out.
But
I do kind of wish we got more of the animals
Yeah.
because they do get relegated to the sidelines once the competition really starts.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of buildup with the familiars, and then it was just kind of like, all right, we're done with that for now.
It's kind of just to teach you like attributes of each of the witches, where it's like, well,
Mhm.
Doris the octopus goes with the woman who was like made from a mermaid who decided to walk on land, and the chickens are two women who shout at each other because chickens henpecked.
Chickens are loud.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. Then there's isn't Ethel Feedbag? Is she the one who has the pig?
Yep.
It's like,
The
oh, I bet
literal
you got that.
Feedback would be a horse, but what do I know?
Yeah, but horses are too noble for that kind of character.
We have to throw logic out the window. Who actually uses a feedback?
Mhm.
And we have to go more for stereotypes of what human traits we can put on animals.
Oh.
Exactly.
But then you get Rover, the little earthworm.
Yes.
It
Love
was so
Rover.
So sweet.
It was heartbreaking when it was like Belladonna could have laughed in Terrence's
Oh.
face that she named him Rover, but she knows that he just wanted a dog. And I was like, that is
Yes.
so heartbreaking.
He wanted a pet so bad and lived at an orphanage, so could not have one, and has a worm that he names Rover. Oh, devastating.
Also, why was there so much in our lives that we were like, do you know that orphanage teachers are the worst and abusive and will like hold vendettas against children?
You know what? I kind of blame Little Orphan Annie for starting all of this because there became like just an orphanage obsession in media for quite a while. That seems like one of the first ones, Little Orphan Annie. So Miss Hannigan started it.
I feel like it started earlier because doesn't Dickens have some really horrible
Yes, you're right.
orphanages?
Oh, yeah.
So I feel like
You're
it's
right.
a really old trend, actually.
Well, it's probably built on like, I mean, a lot of children who were given up, like there weren't enough resources to attribute to
Mhm.
them. But instead of like blaming society and capitalism, we were like, those orphan teachers, man, they're actually the worst. They're just inherently evil and not just probably doing their best and overworked.
I was saying they're not overworked.
You
Don't worry about
know.
that. Because whenever you see them depicted, it's like 500 children and one adult trying to care for all of them.
Who is feeding
So I
them?
guess if there was a kid that was like trying to bring a bunch of worms in, you'd be really mad. But
But he's only trying to bring the one worm
I
in.
know.
But if every kid brings in one worm,
Then you're overrun with
Mm.
worms.
It's a lot of worms.
I mean, and to be fair, she does say that he bit her really hard when he was a baby.
how to pinch children without leaving marks so the health inspector doesn't catch on.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't like that.
I'm not trying to justify her in any way. She's a terrible person in this book.
Yeah.
no, she is abusive. I'm just
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
more about the representation of like orphan keepers in books.
The caregivers in general.
Yeah, where it's always like evil.
I think at the end, because at the end Terrence turns her into a spider. That's how he discovers he's a wizard. They say she's replaced with a new headmistress who's fat, and that's how you know she's nice.
That's the one non-fat phobic thing they did, and it's still stereotypical.
Yeah.
Jolly, of course.
You know, fat people, they're either evil or jolly. So
Yep. They can only be those things. So
Well, and if you're going to have a nice headmistress of an orphanage, they have to be fat and jolly.
I also love at the end of this book that like Aramin and Belladonna are like, we're moving out of the house because going into the twist, you said that Terrence discovers he's a wizard, that he's going to live in the house by himself. And it's like, why aren't they like adopting him or becoming caretakers? Like they're just leaving this child alone.
embrace that child-free life.
And Aramin moved out of his parents' place at like 15, though.
That's true, but Terrence is like 11.
But Terrence is a stronger wizard than Aramin.
Oh, so
And nothing can go wrong with very strong powers and no parental oversight.
But also, like, Ibbotson recognizes that, like, oh, he still needs parental supervision because they're like, well, the wizard watcher is actually just a glorified babysitter at the end of the day.
I thought that part was really sweet too. So the wizard watcher is this like multi-headed seal dog eye stalk monster thing.
Yeah.
Left hand head talks to the right hand head, and the right hand head talks back to the left hand head. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
Aramin created him to watch for the greatest wizard who will inherit his legacy or whatever. And so when they find Terrence, the wizard watcher is sad because he's like, oh, there's no job left for me now. And Belladonna says, you have to watch over the wizard. And I thought that was very cute.
We have to go live our child-free life.
Hey, we don't see that depicted enough. So
That's fair. I mean, you're not wrong, but
let's give them a pass on that they decided we will not adopt this child.
we will just give him our house, okay? That is what we have to do.
He's got a dog. What else do you need?
Yeah.
I mean, the logic of this book doesn't necessarily hold up. It's true.
I mean, there's a witch that turns herself into a table and just decides that she wants to be a table from now on.
Yeah.
I actually really liked her full circle. Like myself,
I think I'd rather be a table. Yeah.
Like, I want to be a table sometimes. I don't want to be 20 anymore because, like, same girl, same. I do not want to be 20 anymore.
I was really ready in the beginning because there's a long period of this book where she's talking about how she wants to be young and where the book is kind of glorifying youth, like poking fun at, oh, you're old, how funny. And I was really ready to be very mad at her plotline and how that upholds this harmful like society value of youth over everything. And then at the end, when she's decides that actually she wants to be old again, I was like, okay, I guess you've ended my whole rant prematurely.
Fine, I'm no longer mad about that.
I guess I can't be mad. God.
Book weirdly like does well about like dropping breadcrumbs and picking them back up again. Like the whole like youth spell was like the beginning, and then at the end she was like, oh, I regret that. And I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And I also was shocked when they played matchmaker and got Madame Olympia and the ghost together because they were like, they were made for each other. And I'm like, oh, you're definitely right, but I didn't see that coming.
I also didn't see that coming. I was like, oh, I thought we were just done with Madame Olympia. Okay.
Right. And they're like, nope, we're gonna get her a husband and we're gonna get him a wife, and that's all they ever wanted. Like, it's their weird, twisted, happy ending.
And everyone gets a pretty good happy ending in this book, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this book is really good at dropping breadcrumbs that you don't necessarily see when you're reading it for the first time, but if you're rereading it, you recognize, oh, I see what you're doing. Like, you're weaving this really seamlessly into the plot so that the twists, when they come, are a surprise still, but they're not just completely random, out of left field, no hints about it whatsoever.
Because also, like, when Terrence gets taken back to the orphanage, I was like, oh, I forgot, like, they probably would have cared about this child going missing. I thought Madame Olympia had just stolen him because she was like, I can't get the worm. I'll take this child. And she had, like, figured out that he was a wizard. But then I was like, oh, no, it was just the orphanage, which is an even better surprise because it's so ridiculous.
Oh, they do care.
Like, and I love that the police officers were like scared but still casing the joint to like wait for him to leave, and then they're like, you can't run away, son. Like, infrastructure actually working is a weird twist.
I really loved the twist that Terrence ended up being the most powerful wizard. So he's introduced with Rover, the earthworm, who Belladonna thinks is a very powerful dark familiar and allowing her to do all of this dark magic. But it turns out that it's actually just been Terrence the whole time doing all of the dark magic for her, but neither of them knew. And it's just a very, like, I don't know. I really love that.
It's a good twist.
Yeah.
I appreciated it too because I really thought it was going to be something kind of just like, oh, we find out that maybe Terrence is the familiar, or that he just inspires her so much, or that the worm actually was the familiar or something. So I did like that was the person doing the magic.
I had definitely clocked that it was Terrence from the beginning because immediately after introducing him, the Wizard Watcher goes on vacation. And I was like, oh yeah, they had to get him to leave so that when Terrence comes to the site, no one's watching it. But I was like, that's really smart. And it's fun to read that. Because I think some kids could pick up on that and be like, oh, I bet he's the wizard, and then gets really excited. That's where I'm like, well, this book is smart because it at least allows kids to like kind of foreshadow and kind of figure things out, but it doesn't like a humorous way where you're like enjoying the entire time you're reading. And it's not like, oh, you're stupid for not picking up on this when it's not on the page, but like there's enough there for young kids to read into things.
I think it respects its readers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there were we sort of alluded to this earlier, two very dark moments in this book.
Yeah.
One I would say is just gruesomely dark, and the other one is like emotionally dark.
Mm-hmm.
The gruesome one's pretty straightforward. Madame Olympia's
The Symphony of Death.
Yeah, the Symphony of Death. She summons a bunch of rats who eat each other and then themselves. Like, ugh, auto cannibalism is a lot.
Yeah, that was gross.
That was very dark.
And I was not expecting that much of a turn.
Yeah.
Like Symphony of Death, ha ha ha, necromancy, and then it's just like, oh my gosh.
I also love that like Ehrman is such a hypocrite because he sees that happen and he's like, well, she's probably not that dark all the time. Like I can appreciate that was the darkest thing, but I'm gonna like hold a point back because ew. Like
I could change her.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. At that point, he's like, well, I know she's the winner, and I guess it's great that I found such a dark wife, right? He's like so scared about it. Like, God, this is what you asked for. Literally what you asked for.
But it's also a little frustrating in terms of Ehrman's character because he wants a dark wife, but he doesn't want anyone darker than him.
Mm-hmm.
He's still got to be the best.
Again, it's a guy who wants a smart girl. He wants to explain things to her.
Mhm.
It's just internalized misogyny.
Yeah. Well, when it's explaining all of his evil deeds, none of them are that bad. Like, he doesn't
really
actually
not.
do anything. The one thing he does is sink an oil tanker. I got to that line and I was like, okay, that's actually bad.
I mean, he also does become weirdly obsessed with a dead guy who murdered a bunch of his wives. So I also think that that's probably the darkest thing.
But I think that's just because he's alone in this big house. He has no other friends except for his employees.
Who he's sent off to babysit these weird witches.
Yeah, who he sends off all the time. Like, he latches on to Sir, whatever his name was. Not Monty. Monty was the actor.
Sir Simon, I thought was his name.
Like, no wonder he latches on to Sir Simon.
He's also dreading getting married. So it's that thing where, like, you have a medical procedure coming up, so you read about all the things that can go wrong. Other people do that, right?
Anytime I have any kind of medical symptom, I Google it, and it's always just like immediately cancer. Like, that's the first thing that you look up. Like, no!
Oh, yeah.
Oh, gosh. So yes, I do that.
And the other dark thing that happens is one of the sisters accidentally murders her sister, like manslaughter style. Like she pushes her into a bottomless pit. And the implication is that the sister can never come back. Like,
well, the bottom of the pit just, well, they thought there was a bottom and then it's gone. And,
it's gone. And like, a lot of this novel is lighthearted and joyful, but that one instance, it's like every time you come in on the sister, she's like asking, do you think I had the right chicken? Which is like what started the fight. And it's like, oh, this woman is like forever changed from this moment. The ramifications are there. It was very jarring in this book to have that because I was just not expecting it. I was not expecting like actual sibling murder.
With consequences too. She's like very depressed.
Yeah, I think that the depression, I mean, obviously it makes sense from a personal standpoint, but it is kind of jarring for the book because it's so lighthearted in other ways. Despite some of the goriness, the tone is still very lighthearted in general. And then you get her and she's just understandably depressed. And you're like, this is kind of whiplash from everything else that's going on.
Yeah. I do wonder, Sarah, you mentioned like this book takes its readers seriously. And I do think like these moments are places where it takes it seriously, because a lot of times nowadays, like television and media for children is very sanitized. Like you get the Disney-fication of things where it's like everything's bright and happy colors, and like people just hug on TV all the time to settle their differences.
We were sad, but now we're over it because it's 5 minutes later.
Right. And everything that's wrong is just miscommunication. So I do enjoy the fact that like this book in the late 70s, and something that like stuck out to Lilly as a book she loved, it takes children seriously and it lets them have darker moments. And I could see if I had read this book at 11, I probably would have lost some sleep because I was a huge scaredy cat, and like the rats would have like given me nightmares. But like there is something to letting kids have those moments when they're at age 11 and 12 where it's like, oh, I get to feel nervous and feel scared, and that's an okay emotion to start playing with. And I don't think we let kids do that very often nowadays.
It's true. And so she's dealing with the consequences of this for, I would say, like at least a third of the book. But then at the end, Terrence reverses it and brings her sister back. And so it's like you have to sit with it for a long time, but it is still ultimately okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. The pacing of that was very good, I think. If it had been too quick, it would have felt cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
I also do like that at the end, nothing changes with the sisters. They go back to fighting pretty much immediately. Because isn't that every sibling relationship ever? Oh, I regret what happened, but also it doesn't change our sibling dynamics at all.
Yeah. I was also, I think, upon this reread, very affected by the baby kraken.
Oh, yeah.
So sad.
That was sad to me too. They're like, oh, we can't throw it back in the water. It's a baby. Like, oh my God.
I think that's also one of the really darkest points of the book, because they talk about how the kraken's parent died.
Yeah.
And it was hit by an oil tanker, presumably the one that Araman sank, right?
Yeah.
So he killed the kraken's parents. And it's just a baby, and it needs someone to.
And then in the audiobook, it like makes noises, and the narrator makes noises, and you're just like, no, stop that.
It'll go like, mommy, daddy.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, it's poor baby. Like, I'm so sad that it chose Araman as its dad, because Araman, like, it's one of those things where everyone is like, isn't it so funny that he hates it, but really secretly loves it? I'm like, no, he's just screaming at this baby.
Yeah. But then it's like wrapped up in this scene that's hilarious, because Mabel Rack, I think, was the mermaid witch, or the witch whose mother was a mermaid.
Yeah.
Her big great feat was going to be to summon a kraken, which she does.
He deserves more points than she got. I think she
Yeah.
gets 4 points.
I think so too.
Right?
And, I mean, granted, she had the embarrassing thing where her aunts came and, made a scene.
That was the hilarity I was referring to. Yes.
So, sorry to steal your thunder.
She's like, go away, you're embarrassing me.
So, like, yes, that happens. And yes, the kraken is a little baby, but also she summoned a kraken.
She still did it.
She deserves at least 6 points.
I agree.
I agree.
It was the most successful.
Yeah. It felt weird. She did summon it. She succeeded. I guess it's like in terms of darkness, it technically wasn't dark enough because you just like got a cute baby. I also love that at the beginning they thought it was a handbag. Like these mermaids come over the beach and she's like, you forgot your handbag.
But then at the end, she asks to be turned into a mermaid and to go find her aunts to apologize, which I thought was very sweet.
I actually thought it was really interesting, her family history, because her mother was a siren who was not very successful. So she's like, fuck this, got plastic surgery to give her legs, and then goes and lives life as a human. And like, that's great. That's a fantastic backstory.
I would read that book.
Yeah.
I also do love that like there was that kind of happy moment with plastic surgery, because later Madame Olympia's backstory is horribly sexist, because it's just like women just buy these creams from her to look young and vibrant, and it never works. And it's like, well, tell us more about how you feel about women aging.
I thought that was like almost an indictment on society pressuring women to be appealing.
Yeah.
I kind of got those vibes too.
Yeah, because she was taking advantage of women's insecurity to create these lotions that did work only for a short time, and then make them uglier than they were before, so that they're forced to like keep coming back.
Yeah, maybe I read too much into that.
I don't think it quite gets there, but I think it tried to.
I think if this had been a book for older readers, that would have been more effective. But it's hard to make those kinds of comments on society effectively when you have a book for 10-year-olds.
I think I agree with that, because like there was something to this where you're reading about horrible, ugly witches, where I kept thinking like, this is just treating 10-year-olds to treat old people like shit. Where they're like, I'm afraid of them. Why? Because they have to be evil.
It's also a short book too, so it's like hard to be pulling too much out of it, you know what I mean? When it's like, yeah, the author probably only had this much space to dedicate to this one thing, so maybe it's not going to be the greatest.
I do think probably the worst aspect of this book was that you have to be beautiful, but if you try to be beautiful, that makes you evil and bad. You have to be effortlessly beautiful. That was, I think, the roughest sort of through line.
Yeah, makeup, creams, garbage. Only way to be beautiful is genetics. Genetics are the only way, so.
Being older, not great either.
Nope.
Yeah. Well, and that's even like, there's a moment where Ehrman confronts Madame Olympia about stealing a familiar. And it's like, well, when you're really in love, you see her for what she really is, which is ugly. And it's like, well, that could be a nice moment of like, oh, you get to see like someone's inner self and you see that it matches their outer self or whatever. But it was more a side of like, oh, she kind of looks older now because she's not enchanting him as well. Like, it was a weird energy.
What? She had an opinion? Instantly ugly.
I do like in the audiobook, Madame Olympia, the audio narrator does a cackle.
The laugh.
And it's awesome. Like, if you guys can look it up, definitely do it. I thought Madame Olympia was an effective evil person just because she was so dark. It was surprising to have someone go that dark for that character, but I enjoyed it.
But she's also not that much of a villain. I mean, yes, she steals Rover, and yes, she's going to throw Rover into a fire when he doesn't work for her. And that's pretty shitty. Like, I'm not trying to make it sound like that's not bad, but besides that, she doesn't really do anything.
She cheats to enter the competition so that she can kill Ahriman. I mean, not that we care about Ahriman, but that's antagonistic, I think you could say.
She definitely plays fast and loose with the rules. She moved into the village. Sure, it was by threatening the witch who was living in that house, but she did move.
Yeah, sure.
I think she's an interesting character because, like, you're right, she's not like super duper evil when it comes to things, but it also sounds like it's because she thinks she's a shoo-in. Like, she's looking at the competition and she's like, yeah, I did what I needed to do. It's fine. She was a little bit worried about Belladonna, so she like doesn't want to get kicked out for cheating. So she steals the worm, which is a little bit more conniving. And then she like wants to murder the worm because it didn't work for her. I got this energy of like, well, I just expected to win, so I don't need to do too much. Like, I have to be smart about how I cheat.
And it's true that they mentioned that she has poisoned cakes or something that she's left for Belladonna. I think the reason why I don't view her as actually that much of an antagonist, even though she clearly is the antagonist of this book, is that she's so ineffective. She is not an effective I never feel like she is actually a threat to Belladonna.
That's just because it's a kid's book, though.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like that's kind of always villains in kids' books where it's like, they're really bad at being a villain.
Maybe, but like, I've read kids' books where I feel like the villain actually has a chance of winning.
I think it's because of the Terrence twist, right? If Rover had been the source of the powers, it would have worked.
Yeah, maybe.
I also think I kind of shoved that off on the humor aspect of this book. Like, this book feels more of a humorous tale than it is like deep fantasy where there's going to be a villain who could persevere. I always read this is a humor book, so it's going to have a happy ending in some sort, which is why, like, when it went dark, I was like shocked. But her being ineffective, I was more like, oh, that's because this is supposed to be kind of deeply funny. Like, Ehrman is supposed to be very smart. And she kind of like picks up on the fact of like, nope, I could murder him pretty easily. Like, he's not that dark. He's kind of ineffective. I just want to rule his household. Like,
he's a doofus, I think is the right word for him. He
Yeah.
might be very good at his job, but he's a doofus.
But we don't ever see him doing his job, so we don't know.
There's a couple of lines that like, oh, who spends his time perfecting hair loss spells to make people lose their hair, like stuff like that. You don't actually see him do anything though.
So dark.
Yeah.
I love that he gave them, this is just adult things. These are all technically adults. And he gave them like a hand mirror where he's like, you can look at me anytime you want. And I'm like, there are times when I feel like privacy is key.
Yeah, that sounds like a bad idea.
Mhm.
Actually.
That sounds like a terrible spell. I would be horrified if someone could just look in on me at any moment.
But they can't hear. That's
That's
key.
Yeah.
I don't want someone looking in on me when I'm in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Campbell.
It seems worse if they can't hear.
I don't know.
And like at one point, Belladonna is so besotted with him that she's watching him sit in a closet waiting for his ghost friend. He's just so lonely. And I'm like, honey, no.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out her love for him and all the times where she's like, I hope Terrence doesn't figure out that I'm in love. And then he's immediately just like, yeah, you're in love with him. And she's like, what? How did you know?
The romance plotline of this book, like you all know, I'm a big romance nerd, but it was so not compelling to me.
No.
And not even when I was a kid. This is not like an adult saying it doesn't hold up. Just like that was never the point. I think I just loved reading about all of the different witches.
I mean, the romance is insta love, so there's not anything to it.
And then when they do get together at the end, they're so like schmoopy.
They're very schmoopy.
I did like that she was going to break up with him. I did love the like switch because I think this happens a lot with like for girl novels where it's like
Mhm.
we can't be together because I have a duty kind of thing. But it was her being like, hey, Ermin, you have a duty to like birth a child that's going to be evil. So I have to leave. And I was like, oh, I like that. It's her being like, I can't have your child, not like I have to have a baby and you cannot
Mhm.
give me what I want. I like that role reversal because that was also something I wasn't expecting of them having a discussion of like, what if you have a gray baby? What if you have a white baby? Like, this will not work. I can't do that.
Oh, I did want to do a little bit of a words are weird segment. I don't know if we'll actually do the transition music or not because it came up so naturally in conversation. We've been using light and dark to refer to these witches. The book definitely says white and black. And I know that that's just like a language quirk, but every time she was like, I wish I was black. I was like, oof. It was just basically a translation thing from 1979 England
Yeah.
to 2023 America, but still.
Yeah, I think that's just because the terms don't have those connotations in the UK as they do here, especially not in 1979 UK.
It was weird to have this audiobook that feels very modern with like the cover, and it's obviously a British term, so it doesn't mean the same thing, but they use the term faggot, and I was like, I feel like they should have made that update by now, and like someone's drinking gin or someone's doing something, and I'm like, I don't mind that this is darker. I do mind the fact that they haven't changed some of the ickier words that we like now all agree as a society we should watch out for. Like,
But they give Agatha Christie a pass, so I mean,
Specifically to the point of faggot, even in the UK now, I don't think that has the same, like, I think they still use that term as a firelighter or whatever.
And cigarettes, right?
yeah, it's a cigarette.
Yeah.
But I think that was like the word thing where I was like, wow, we're just talking about cigarettes and stuff and using very specific types of words. It was a little strange to me, some of the word choices in this. But you're right. Like I used the term as the British way when I said it. So, like, they do allow it. Like it was just weird to listen to it in 2023 where I was like, oh, I wish we had made some updates on this book.
I think it's just jarring. Because
Yeah.
clearly that's not the intention, and not just, oh, they didn't know better. It was a different word.
Yeah.
But you have to like stop and go, wait, nope.
Yeah.
Nope. It's okay to keep listening. But I think it was that word, and there was one other one where I was like, oh, this is weird. Like it's jarring to hear, and I feel like it would have been changed by now. But I guess sometimes with older books, they're like, we'll just keep it the same. People can have a conversation with their kid about words being weird and different words having different connotations way back when.
And I think it's worth considering. I mean, I definitely think that some older books should come with a content warning for things like that, this book included. But I don't necessarily think that the books need to be updated if there's the conversation in the title page or whatever around that, because that is how it was written and that is how the language worked in that time. It's just that the meaning of the word has changed, not that they were using a bad word at that time.
Yeah, like a context section.
A context section is always key sometimes with those, but
yeah,
I also think that that's a larger conversation because I know like some Judy Blume books they've tried to like quote unquote update where they're like they brought out their cell phone in a context of like they went home, picked up a cell phone and made a call, and it's like, well, you need to change more if you're gonna change
Yeah,
I don't like that. Yeah.
why are you doing that? You could, it's a historical novel. We can all just
Yeah.
say that. Like,
Yeah. I think I do like the idea of just giving a hey, heads up. Hey guys, heads up warning. Better than changing the actual text.
yeah,
Mhm.
that's fair.
Yeah.
But it's always helpful because I remember when I was reading this, I was like, it's a very updated cover. So then when I was listening to it read to me, I was like, this is just older than I thought it was.
I agree, Hannah. And I mentioned Agatha Christie because my book club just covered one of Agatha Christie's books and people had like really mixed reactions to it. And it's because of the same thing, I think. And I honestly think that more of her work needs to have kind of a context page in there, like back in the 50s. So things were a little different back then, and we said things differently. The language was different, and we need to be cognizant of that.
Agatha Christie might have been racist, but she is dead now. So you can continue to read some of her work.
Yeah.
Yeah. An annotated Agatha Christie. It was like, hey, footnote. Bummer.
Yes.
Yeah. What a bummer. I want that in all my Agatha Christie footnotes now. What a bummer.
But that sort of hits on something that Sarah and I were talking about right before recording is, would I give this to a kid today? And I feel like not without supervision because of not the language stuff so much as the like really shitty gender things.
Yeah.
But it's a fun book. So like, I don't
I'm
know.
trying to think of how my parents treated when I was reading books. Because I know I started reading romance novels way before it was appropriate because I was just the youngest in my family. So like other people were reading those. And like I was kind of at a moment in time where I was like, oh, I'm too old to read the books I was reading, but I don't know what to read next. And my mom was like, I enjoyed these books by Nora Roberts. I think they're good literature. Skip the dirty parts. And she just like handed me a book. And like I did skip them, but I'm like wondering why my mom and I never had like a conversation after the fact of like, hey, did you skip those parts? If you didn't, can we talk about it? Like there is a weird lack of supervision I feel we got when we were younger that we don't have as much now.
Yeah.
I mean, my mother gave me all of those kinds of talks about the books. I got the Mom's 5 Rules for Sex talk when I was like 7.
Oh, fun.
Oh my gosh.
Like, so I got that really young. And I think consequently, when she gave me those books, because she gave me some pretty raunchy books, or not books that were inherently raunchy, like they weren't erotica, but they had some pretty raunchy scenes in them.
Mm-hmm.
She was like, you know my feelings on this. We don't have to have this conversation about this book specifically because we've had it already. So I think that if you're having those kinds of conversations in general, you don't necessarily need to have that conversation about a specific book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But with books like this that have aged in ways that are not necessarily great, but that are still good, enjoyable books, I think you do want to give the book with caveats, you know. But I also wouldn't be worried if I saw my child reading this book, my hypothetical child, because I'm never going to have kids. But I think it is still a good book. It's got some issues, but it's still a good book.
I think there's a difference between recommending a book that has maybe problematic themes versus like, I got into all sorts of stuff I shouldn't have been reading at the time.
Yeah.
But I knew that. Like, I knew that this was me doing something that I probably shouldn't be doing. So there was like sort of a different energy. It wasn't like a trusted adult saying, this is wonderful, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't recall my parents ever like giving me books, honestly, or like kind of keeping tabs on what I was reading. It was more of just like oh, she's reading, thank goodness, we have a reader. And they didn't really monitor what I was reading. So I feel like as a kid, I did kind of get into books like this that had some of these outdated terms and things that maybe should have had, you know, some context brought up and some conversations. But I think it kind of goes back into what Sarah and Hannah, you mentioned it previously with like the Disney movie thing. Like if you have a conversation either beforehand or afterwards, like, hey, what did you think of this book? I think that if you're covering your bases with that kind of thing, it's okay.
Yeah. And I guess that is like, there is a weird thing about raising children. I do not have children. I don't know how I feel about having children moment to moment, but like watching my sisters raise kids, where like kids do want to read media that they know their parents read, because like there's a weird like mommy and daddy did it, so I want to do it too. So in that context, it's like, well, when they're growing up, you're also going to give them media that you recognize. Like, I know I've purchased the Magic Tree House books for my nephews, and I know I've gotten murder mystery ones. And I remember getting one of my nephews, like the Horrible Henry books, and I hadn't read it. And he was like, I don't like that. That kid is mean. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's helpful to know. So I do think kids, like Sarah and Laura said, if you're raising them with the right conversations, they can pick up on it themselves and they'll tell you of like, this felt weird. I didn't like Aramin. Like if you actually are involved with what your kid is reading and they're like, I don't like Aramin, he seems mean, you know, you're like, oh, okay, well now I know. And it's a weird like line to walk where it's like, I wouldn't mind them reading this book if they were like, what did you like reading when you were growing up, mommy? And I was like, which? I wouldn't feel like the worst person in the world for saying that was one of my favorite novels.
No, I think just recommending a book with no like caveats, if you're coming from a position of authority, implies that everything in it is good and that you approve of it. And so I think it's that recommendation piece that I'm like, you would want to say like something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard because like Laura, one of our best friends, like her kid loved the Pocahontas movie for a long time and he was singing the song. And she was like, yeah, he's like 2. So like, how do you be like, that's not the best song, honey? It's always a growing conversation of like, yeah, you might love that, but there are caveats and you're a little white boy with blonde hair screaming savages. Like you can't do that.
I think that's interesting though, Lily, that you bring that up, like that recommendations like seem like they're almost a stamp of approval. Like I love everything about this book. And I feel that way even now when I read books, and I'll say that I enjoy them. If somebody says, oh, would you recommend this? I'm always kind of like going at it from a standpoint of I really liked it for these reasons. And you might not like it because it's really just a fine line to walk, you know, because you don't know how somebody's going to react to it, and you may not have liked everything about a book.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why for this podcast, we specifically phrase it as who should read this book, not like do we recommend reading this book, because readers are so different.
Well, and I think that that's kind of just if you're going to be in a position of like what we do on a podcast where we look at things with a critical lens. Like we all just went on a huge discussion of issues we found with this book, but we started off with like, I loved this book. I enjoyed it so much. And then it's like all of these things where you're just knocking on it. And it's just like, well, yeah, but that's because both things can be true. You can fully enjoy a book while seeing like every single issue in it, or be like, well, that wasn't the best, but I at least liked it.
I honestly love that though. There are some fandoms where you can't criticize them, otherwise the other people in the fandom attack you. Situations that will remain unnamed. Whereas like we talk about Terry Pratchett, whom we love with every corner of our hearts, and still some of those books are not good. And that's okay.
I mean, I think that there's this view in society in general, not just fandom in particular, where if you like something, you can't think critically about it. And that's just not true, right? Like you can like something and criticize it, and your criticisms can be valid and insightful, and you can decide that you like it despite those things that you're criticizing. Like it's not that you can't find issues with the things you like.
I will say one of the fandoms that I have noticed to be the most forgiving and have like the best sense of humor is the Twilight fandom. Those people love that series. They love the movies. They love it all. And they are so willing to make fun of it. They're so willing to take criticism of it and be like, yep, but I still like it. And I really appreciate that about all those fans, because like you guys have said, there's other people who within different fandoms are just like, no, this is a perfect text. I will hear nothing.
But also that's just women learning how to be self-deprecating because all of the things we like get shit on. Like
Fair.
But I do think that there's something to be said about like it's the whole stamp of approval conversation where it's
Mhm.
like if you like something, you are approving the message of it. That's not the same thing as like liking a book or enjoying the time you had while reading it. Like those are two different things. And I feel like sometimes people, again, with the whole like add context to the novel, people lack context with reviews, like where
Mhm.
it's like I'm writing a
Mhm.
review in a moment in time. A review on any day of the week could be written differently by me
Right.
based on how I'm feeling or what I'm focusing in on when I read a book. And so, like, I do think sometimes people get a little bit too harsh with people who are reviewing things being like, well, that means you liked every single thing about it. And it's like, no, it doesn't. It means like I gave it a good review and I just felt like talking about the nice things instead of
Mhm.
like all the
Yeah.
mean things. So,
Well, and to bring it back to this book, like, I don't think there's any problems with it for an adult to read it because, I'm a fully formed human and I'm not going to be influenced by weird subtext,
yeah.
or at least not this level of weird subtext.
We hope not.
Yeah. And so it's like, I don't know, there's a different, like, I don't know. I'm glad you guys liked it.
Yeah.
I really liked it.
It was very fun. It was just so fun to think about.
It was, like I said, an emotional roller coaster though, because one minute you're kind of laughing at what's happening, the next minute you're like, oh my gosh, you just fell into a black hole. What? And then the next moment you're crying over worms. So I think that there's a lot of different ups and downs in this book.
Mhm.
This book has the range.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I will say I did feel bad for a lot of the women in this book where it's like, why were they so mean to that grocer? There has to be a reason. Where he's like, I would rather live in a tree than spend another moment with my wife and daughter. I want them both to be dead before I leave. Like,
Yeah.
We needed the more of the backstory.
I love that. Like, it's a very humorous novel where they were like, well, their favorite thing to do was just beat up on their father and husband.
I think that's one of those things where in the 80s and 90s and maybe even early 2000s, the henpecked wife was
Mhm.
a funny joke, not
Mhm.
something horrifying and abusive.
Henpecking.
Yeah.
But I did love the tree's energies when they're like, we didn't ask for this. Why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Please no.
Yeah. The spirits who are like, get them out of here.
I do not want this. Thank you so much.
And then the one tree who's like, nah, he's cool. He just wants to, sit and chill.
Yeah.
I like his energy. We seem to mesh well.
Good company. Yeah. I loved this book opens with Araman having the most kind, supportive parents on the face of the planet.
Yeah.
Who we
Oh.
never see ever again.
No.
Well, they
I
know he didn't want
know.
to be around them. So
Yeah. They go out and get books on dark magic. Like, we have to raise our tiny terror right.
they changed his name immediately. They were like, oh, that's not going to match you totally. We 1,000% support you. Here's a new name. Like,
Mhm. Yeah. That was like, oh, good parents.
didn't save them from having Araman as a son, unfortunately. But
Well, maybe they should have been a little more involved in the teen years.
yeah.
I feel like he found an incel forum when he moved out at 15 and had no one to rescue him.
Well, he pretty much is the typical incel where it's like I've never met or spoken to a woman and therefore they're all disgusting. Yeah. Good pick, Lily.
Thanks. So, would you tell our listeners what you guys are doing on your podcast right now?
So right now we are in our indie mission. It's where we cover an indie book with an indie author. Right now we are reading K.E. Andrews, The Assassin of Grins and Secrets. And we're just finishing up the plot on that over on Our Pod. That's OWWR Pod. And next week we will have K.E. Andrews on the podcast to discuss the book. So that's exciting. And then we also have Travis Baltrey coming on to discuss Legends and Lattes and his new book.
Bookshops and bone dust.
Yes, thank you. I always say book dust.
She
and
gets it
bone
reversed
chops.
every time. And that's why I knew she said and his new book. She was worried.
I said it to his face and I will never live the shame down. But yeah, so head on over to ourpod.com to see what else we have coming down the pipes because we have a couple of like bonus content. We're not starting a new season until the new year. So we have a bunch of other stuff coming out that's going to be a surprise for people. So
Ooh,
I'm really excited for your talk with Travis Baldry.
oh,
Travis was amazing.
he's so nice.
I've been like a huge fan for a while, and just to even get to talk to him, I was just so nervous, and I was really worried I was gonna like faint or something. So it was so
Yeah.
much fun.
But thank you. So yeah, we can't wait for that episode to drop soon. So keep an eye out.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find our show notes and a lot of other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye.